Hello everybody, my name is Ciro Marchetti. I am a graphic designer and an illustrator, and as of the last 15 to 20 years approximately, I have been involved in the design of various decks of tarot cards, oracles, Lenormand and Kipper. I was born in Italy, brought up in the United Kingdom, worked in South America, and now I'm based in Miami, Florida. I received a selection of questions, and in answering them I hope I can provide you with some insight and explanation into my methodology in regard to designing those various decks. I hope you will find it interesting. So let's get started with question number 1. How did I first get involved with tarot decks and their design? Well, in all honesty, unintentionally. It came about by initially my sending references of my work and portfolios of my work to various publishers, really with the intention of soliciting general work, book covers, calendars, and other sort of related merchandise, and the response was, sometimes successful, sometimes not. And but ironically, in one case, one of the publishers, which in this case was one of the major publishers of tarot decks, responded saying that they didn't have any need for books and calendars and posters. However, they had been intrigued by the style of my work and had passed on the references that I had provided to their divinations department, which handled the production of tarot decks. And I received a response proposing or asking if I would be interested in doing a tarot deck. They indicated how much work that might represent, and that whatever financial rewards from that might be minimal, but if I was interested. I was intrigued, yes, but I also made it very clear in my response to them that I didn't know anything about tarot. They in turn responded saying that they didn't think that would be too problematic, because once again they felt that the style and nature of my work kind of lent itself to this subject, and so I proceeded to spend the next year in the production of that first deck. And to cut a long story short, it was a surprise, I think, both to the publishers and to myself, that it was relatively well received, and that process kind of got me hooked. I found it interesting, but I played it very safe, and I kept as closely as possible to the symbolism and the visual content of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. I knew far too little to risk going too far away from the norm and the traditional expectations. Having said that, the process of producing it, as I said, I did find intriguing. And once I had given all the artworks to the publishers, expecting them to, at various stages, point out errors or propose new directions where maybe I had, you know, made mistakes. On the contrary, they found they didn't have any issue with any of the cards except, I believe, one, if I recall. And when I provided an explanation of why I had depicted it the way I did, they were happy with that. So the process was quite painless in that sense, yes? And the way that publishing works is that there was probably a year to 18 months time lapse between my having delivered the artwork and them finally publishing the deck and making it available for sale. In that interim, I had already started to work on a second deck where I felt I could be a little bit more adventurous, and I wanted to be more adventurous, because what I did deliberately from the onset was to acknowledge my lack of awareness and familiarity with tarot, and use that innocence, if you will, to look at the cards for probably the first time and question myself, what did those images mean to me? And then later on I began to study, and I began to compare what these studies, these books, these previous sort of reference points compared in their explanation to the impressions and the first reaction I had to those images. And was there a correlation? In many cases, yes, there was. However, in many cases, I did question, as a graphic designer and based on my own experience in my profession, I questioned whether those images fully did justice to the meanings they were allegedly supposed to have. And I found that those images to be questionable, not just because of the style and the medium in which they had been produced, often, you know, hundreds of years ago, but I just found them lacking in clarity, in projecting their intended meaning. And so I tried to reach this balance of maintaining tradition to the extent that those images would still be recognizable to current day readers, but to do so in a way that I felt might be a more compelling way to communicate the essence of what they were supposed to mean. That balancing act was a challenge because it required, as I say, a respect for and a reference for the way they had been depicted traditionally, but also in a way that would possibly reflect more contemporary values, both social, moral, cultural, and be more relatable to today's tarot community. My inspiration for producing these various decks comes from the cards themselves, the existing traditional cards. They are obviously a wealth of historical interest and potential, but also for it to be more than just a academic, professional challenge. I've often used my own life experiences and tried to apply that. That way it made it more of a real, I wouldn't say an autobiography, because I feel that my life's experiences maybe obviously are different to everyone else's, but there's always a common denominator that binds us all together, and that makes tarot the tool, the useful tool that it is. So it's a combination of finding ways to capture the essence of those life experiences and project them in a visual way that other people can relate to, that they can apply that and say yes, they can see in those images something from their own experiences. And that's not easy, but it's a fascinating challenge, and one that doesn't get accomplished completely ever. There's always going to be another way to communicate that same message, not necessarily better, but in my case that was my intent. How can I now, on a new project, accomplish a similar objective in a new way, and subjectively a better way? And the fact that the tarot community is so diverse in its aesthetic taste, in terms of how they like or prefer or not certain artistic styles, but also in their own comfort zone in how they read. This provides an interesting, diverse challenge that possibly no one deck can accomplish in its totality. So maybe they'll find a preference in one deck over another for any number of reasons, and so that potential diversity has made the production of various decks not a repetitive process, but an exciting new one in every occasion. Now, the Tarot Decoratif. This was certainly a challenging project, and a risky one, I think. The tarot community is principally divided into two, let's say, with one of the two groups being those who prefer the Rider-Waite-Smith, and the remainder prefer the Marseilles group of cards. The basic difference between the two, apart from the historical spread between them, is that the Marseilles has the, in English we say, the lesser illustrated pips, as opposed to the fully depicted images of the Rider-Waite-Smith. And I felt that a lot of contemporary readers were dismissing the Marseilles because they felt the lack of imagery to be an obstacle, whereas the Marseilles aficionados preferred the Marseilles often for that very same reason. The lack of specific imagery allowed them to use the abstract patterned visual content of the minor arcanas as a blank canvas, if you will, one where they could intuitively get involved within those shapes and turn those into meanings for themselves, which was more flexible than having those images kind of pre-made, pre-presented, predefined as they were in the Rider-Waite-Smith. At that point in my involvement with tarot, I had pretty much considered calling it quits. You know, I'd produce a few decks and that was it. But I was attending a presentation of a man called Russell Sturgis, and he was making a very interesting presentation regarding the history of tarot, and specifically that of the Marseillaise. And he had a theory that the Marseillaise and tarot deck was really a kind of coded means of expressing religious beliefs by a group called the Cathars, who were in conflict with the Vatican, and therefore disguised their spiritual beliefs and communications, disguised it almost as a game, a deck of cards, tarot. And he kind of rationalized this with lots of examples, which I found to be compellingly credible. Now, admittedly, his theories are not universally accepted. Some critique it and do not, and reject it. But nevertheless, I found it compelling enough that I thought it would be an interesting experiment to marry the two, the Rider-Waite-Smith and the Marseillaise. And so that's what I did. I redesigned the major arcana in my own kind of style, but I also maintained for the minor arcanas the same principle of principally having patterned designs for each card, but I then also introduced a small vignette from the Rider-Waite-Smith, or rather from my other decks using the Rider-Waite-Smith. So there was a visual kind of marriage between the two, which I hoped would be a help and an assistance for people who were less experienced with tarot. They could make a relationship between the two styles and two systems, but equally one that the traditional Marseillaise people could still use in their own way. You know, that they could still principally focus on the patterns and, in a sense, ignore those little vignettes. Now, that could either work or it could fail. You know, it could be rejected by both parties. You know, both aficionado groups would turn around and say, what's the point? You know, this sort of marriage of the two systems is forced, and kind of one contradicts the other, and so there was a risk that this experiment wouldn't work. And so initially I self-published it because that way I was in safer territory, where the majority of people that might be interested in purchasing the decks were already previous customers, if you will, and so I felt safer with that, you know. And however, I was both surprised and honoured that this experiment caught the attention of US Games, who felt confident that it would have an appeal to a wider mass audience, and apparently that is the case. So that was the underlying motivation and the rationale why it has now been published in its mass-produced version. Behind me you'll see that I chose the artistic style of the Art Deco period, and hence the name Tarot Decoratif, and I utilized the same fundamentals, namely I produced sort of stained glass window patterns based on the styles of that period, and they serve as the common denominators that link the various cards. You know, and not only are they utilized to separate the suits, but by using the same basic patterns, albeit in different colors, they join the numbers. So the 2 and the 12 of the majors, and then the 2s of each of the minors, use the same pattern as a sort of unifying common denominator. And so that was it. As I say, it was an experiment that I honestly assumed would have a more limited appeal, and I'm pleased to say that it was given a wider and more positive reception. Yes, I am working on several new tarot related projects, one being a new deck where I'm hoping to accompany the deck itself with a series of animated sequences that provide another dimension to those cards and help the characters and the personalities and the scenes come to life. But also I'm working on a series of videos which I will place both on my website and on YouTube, and these will be much longer, and their intention is to serve as meditative videos where readers can watch them to kind of get in the right mental mood in preparation for a reading, and also so they could meditate to them, but also each sequence would have a second part which would go through every card of each minor with a small animated sequence, which in turn each would end with a kind of written summary of keywords, planetary and astrological associations, and basically serve as a kind of summary of each deck. So I'm hoping between the two, the meditation and the information, it could be material that is of interest both for experienced and beginners to tarot. Behind me I'm showing brief samples of each of the arcanas to give you a reference point of what I'm up to. It's a major project. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to actually put them online and make them accessible, but hopefully at the end of it it'll be of interest. the long time involvement in production of tarot cards and the other divinatory systems has made a difference to me, certainly, not necessarily as a personal experience, but certainly from a professional point of view, because all the other art mediums, both as a professional graphic designer or the fine arts, two-dimensional, painting, music, video, you name it, all these other mediums obviously have their appeal and they embrace their customers. You know, people can relate to the imagery, they can be emotively affected by the music, or they can get engrossed in a work of literature or a movie. And so there's this sort of symbiotic relationship between audience and the art form. However, in my conclusion, the art medium of tarot is in a world of its own, because it's a really symbiotic relationship. Tarot readers bond with their preferred decks and with the imagery in a way that no other art medium can match. I have received numerous emails from random people that have indicated how they have gained something from my work, and that is the most rewarding response that one can hope for, irrespective of financial rewards and commercial benefits. To hear from anonymous people that something you have created has touched them is the best reward of all, you know. And I don't think that anything else that I've ever done professionally matches that. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for that experience. Obviously, in conclusion, 15 to 20 years worth of work is hard to quantify in such a brief amount of time, but I hope with these responses it gives you a rough idea of what I've been doing and how I've done it and what it's meant to me, and how, once again, I reiterate the gratitude that I have for having been involved in this medium, in this part of my profession. And so I thank you all, and I hope you found my little discourse here to be of interest. Thank you. Goodbye.